Hi, I'm Saremy, and today I'm going to show you a flat felled side seam with a vent. So we have this little opening here, great for shirts, and I'm going to show you it twice. I'm going to show you very quickly at the very beginning so you can rewatch this video and come right directly to that timestamp. And then if you keep watching, I have a much more thorough explanation and an alternate version if you don't want the wrong side showing inside your vent. So let's get to it. All right, we're going to start wrong sides together. So we're going to put our fabric wrong sides together, line up the side seam above the vent. And we're going to sew our seam to the top of the vent with our full allotted seam allowance. In my case, that's 5/8 of an inch. Now we're going to clip into the seam of the under vent, so not the one with the extension. Clip up to the seam here at the top of the vent. And we're going to trim this seam allowance down. So again, not the one with the extension. This is the bottom vent. So trim it down to a little less than half your seam allowance. So now it looks like we have the same silhouette happening. All right, now we're going to press the seam toward the back. And now for the under vent here, we're going to roll hem this. So turn it twice using the allotted seam allowance. And your fold should line up with the trimmed edge there. So here's my trimmed edge right here. Here's my rolled hem. All right, now we're going to press the other vent here. We're going to get this one out of the way. And we're going to fold this first in half up to the raw edge there, and then in half again. And this fold should line up with the seam here. And this rest of the seam should also fold in half. Your proportions may look a little bit different, but our goal is that the vent fold is lining up to the seam and the seam allowance is being folded and wrapped around that trimmed edge there. And we have a nice straight line. Now we're going to hem the under vent first. We're going to stop at the top there. And now we're going to hem the lower vent as well. And we're going to try and keep it in line with the seam. Here's my seam, and we're going to try and keep our stitching in line with that seam. And when you finish, and you want to go right up to the seam that we sewed, because this bobbin thread is going to meet with the seam on the other side right here at the top. All right, now flip it right side out. Now we're going to do our last seam. We're going to enclose our side seam here. We already wrapped it around with the iron, and we're going to stitch down, and when we get to the top of the vent, we're going to enclose this raw edge here and sew straight across. So it's going to end like this right here at the top of the vent. Just like that. All right, and there we have our flat felled seam with the vent. In the long version of this tutorial, I also show you a method so that you don't have the wrong side showing inside the vent. All right, we're gonna do a flat felled seam with a vent because this is a little bit harder to find a tutorial on. I thought I'd focus on this because flat felled seams are pretty straightforward otherwise. It's just when you get to these tricky little junctures that involve other things that it gets a little confusing. I'm gonna show you this, and you will see some of the wrong side of the fabric inside the vent. The top will cover it, but you'll see a little bit of the wrong side showing if you open the vent. And I'm going to show you how it would look if you did it to the inside and what the pros and cons are of each one. So when we get to that point, I'll show you that. So the one essential thing to prepare your pattern before you cut it out is you need to add a little bit here where you want the vent. So if it doesn't already have a vent in the pattern and you are going to be adding it, you want to add this little extra bit here. Right here, this is 3/8 of an inch, and this is basically the amount that when you do your flat felled seam and you are turning it under on that last step, that is the amount that you need right here, because this side right here needs a little bit extra in order to be able to clean finish. So this is 3/8 of an inch. My total seam allowance for my flat felled seam is 5/8 of an inch. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put our piece wrong sides together. And we're gonna line up these edges because this is still really the true side seam here. This is just a little extra right there. And if you want the vent to go from front to back so that the front is laying over the back, that's this piece here. So if you want your vent to look like it's overlapping toward one direction, this is the top right here. This is the top vent. All right, so we're gonna do this 5/8 of an inch, or your full seam allowance here. And we're gonna go just to the top of that cutout there. Just like that. So we have right to the top there, and this is what it looks like on this side. All right, so on our next step, we're gonna clip into the seam allowance on this shorter side. So we're gonna clip right to the base of our seam. Our third step is we're gonna trim this seam allowance because it's a little easier to do it right now. And the way I like to do this is put the side I'm trimming down towards the table. That way I know it's the only layer there and I can't accidentally cut anything else below it. So this is the side with the extra bit. We're gonna be trimming down the seam allowance of this one here. I'm gonna trim it down to 1/4 of an inch, just so we have enough to hem right over it. We want it narrow enough to be able to hem over it. So it's looking like this. Kind of a mirror image of each other, but this is our original side seam right here. All right, next we're gonna press. All right, for this sample, this is the one I'm gonna show you that's probably the cleanest finish, but you will see some of the wrong side in the inside of the vent, so you'll see that in a second. So we're gonna clean finish the vent opening right now. So on this shorter piece, the one that didn't have the extra, we're going to turn it twice, and the fold should line up with the seam line here, and we'll fold it and iron it like that. And I'll just lift this out of the way, and we're gonna do the same thing here. We're gonna fold this twice again, and we want our second fold to also line up with the seam. So it's gonna be a little awkward right here, and that's okay. So basically, we're gonna fold this, and it's gonna fold the seam in half here, and we can line this raw edge up to the seam line here. And I'll show you closer up at the machine camera so you can see a little better. Okay, so again, what we did was on the piece that didn't have the extra, we folded this twice, this vent, and we pressed it. And we did the same for this one here, and this one lines up, so this raw edge is gonna line up to the seam, and the final fold is also gonna line up to the seam here. So we have this nice long seam here. And we're gonna sew this seam only up to the base of the seam here. And try and make it look nice because this does show, and I try and get it really in line with this original seam, and trim all your threads. And now we're gonna do this one too. So open it up so you don't catch anything else, and we're gonna hem this side. And this is the side where the wrong side shows inside the vent, just like that. All right, in our last step, we're gonna fold this down, and we're gonna stitch our last flat felled edge. And when we get to the base here, we're gonna go across, enclosing this raw edge right here. So let's make a note of it. Let me get rid of these little backstitch threads here. And so right here is where we want to, well, we're gonna turn like 1/8 of an inch or more below that amount, and make sure that you can enclose that edge there. So let me pull this up to the camera here. So this was this hemmed edge. This is this hemmed edge, which stopped right here at the base of the seam. And now we're going to just sew the rest of our French seam, or we're gonna sew the rest of our flat felled seam, and then we're gonna go across to enclose the top raw edge there. So let's start at the top. I make sure I'm going to enclose that seam there. And at the pin, I turn just like that. And that's our finished flat felled seam with a vent and with the wrong side showing there. Looks really nice inside and out. So let me show you how to do this, or what it will look like if you decide to put this to the inside. All right, so here is our seam. It was the same side that stuck out, and we hemmed it already. But this time, instead of folding it to the right side like this and hemming it like this, we fold it to the inside. Same exact thing, like this. We'll hem it. Keep this one out of the way. I'm just folding it under. And now, when we go to do our last stitch, when we enclose it, what's going to happen is you're going to have a nice, right side showing on both sides, but you have this little bit of raw edge right here at the top. It probably won't make a difference. But just in case you have a fabric that just really wouldn't look good like that, and you're okay with that little raw edge, and there we go. I got a little messy right there. But now you have the right side showing on the outside, but you do have this little bit of raw edge right here at the top. You can make it look a little nicer. Most fabrics are going to be just fine with that, especially if you get a little bit of fraying, pull off those edges, pull off those loose threads. Once you get rid of those, no more can fray because it's gone as far as it can usually. All right, and then that way you'll have a vent, if you like, that's completely clean finished, but with a little bit of wrong side showing, or right side showing with a little bit of a raw edge.